Okay, cool. All right, Abhi, let's get started. We will record an intro for you. We will also, but why don't you start by introducing yourself? What is important about you?
Perfect. Important, huh? Very little, I think. But my name is Abhi Ramesh. I am currently one of the founders of the Horizon School of Technology. We essentially run a technology school that bridges the gap between a traditional college education and the real world of technology. So I actually graduated from the University of Pennsylvania and the Wharton School. I was on the Huntsman program, which is a dual degree there. Grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, the good old South. But I was born in India. I lived in Dubai and Bahrain in the Middle East for a little bit. I lived in St. Louis briefly, in Canada briefly, and then now I'm out in San Francisco doing sort of chapter 2 of Horizons.
Did you always want to be an entrepreneur when you grew up?
I did not. I did not. For the first half of my life, I wanted to be a neuroscientist. And then at one point, I remember I wanted to also be an astronaut. And most people want to be astronauts when they're like 5 or 6. But I decided I would be one when I was like 16. So pretty weird. And then after I came to Penn and Wharton, I decided that, I was really interested in finance. I enjoyed sort of the business side of things. So I kind of started pursuing a career in finance. Entrepreneurship for me was more an accident than anything else, to be honest.
So, how did that accident come about? Like, what was your first impression of Wharton and Huntsman? You say you came to Wharton and then you fell in love with business, or I'm sure you had an interest before.
So I did have an interest before. I always, in high school, I was very involved in a lot of different things. I was as a lot of Penn and Wharton students are, right? I was class president and eventually the school president. I was a two-sport varsity athlete. I was a violinist. I've been playing violin for 14 years. So I did all the traditional, I'm a well-rounded kid applying to college type things. But I also enjoyed sort of, looking at different ideas. And I did some SAT tutoring on the side when I was in high school, which, I'm sure we'll talk about later, but that connected to one of my first entrepreneurial experiences. So I was always interested in business very broadly, whatever that means. And so that's like, I decided to come to Penn and to Wharton because it provides kind of a very good, well-rounded business education. I didn't really know what I wanted to do within the world of business. I just knew I was interested in it.
Right. So, in terms of your entrepreneurial career, what was your first impression about Wharton and Huntsman in general?
Yeah. So my impression of Wharton is, originally was it is very competitive. It is, people go there to become the best of the best within the world of business and finance. There are obviously some cons to the competitive nature of Wharton, but overall for me, I thrive in these types of environments. So I enjoyed that aspect of Wharton a lot. Huntsman for me provided sort of, I would say, a balanced kind of side to my Wharton experience, right? Because we're enrolled in the college as well. We have to study abroad. We have a little bit more of like a traditional liberal arts type experience in school. And having grown up in a lot of different countries, not having been born in the U.S., I sort of enjoyed that international kind of studies aspect of Huntsman. Overall, I think, when I first came, my first impression of Wharton and Huntsman was, wow, a lot of very, very talented kids who all want to go into business and finance, go do cool things. So for me, it was very positive, actually. I know some people took away some negative things from their first impression. For me, it was overall positive.
And what was your last impression when you were about to graduate and you were leaving? How did Wharton leave you feeling, and Huntsman?
Yeah, so still overall positively skewed, but it left me kind of wishing for more. And a lot of why I felt that was because of some of the things I did while I was in college that were completely unrelated to college. I took a year off from school. I moved to Los Angeles. I raised a bunch of money from angel investors, venture capitalists, and started multiple projects, which then became multiple companies while I was in school. None of that was related to my kind of traditional Penn curriculum and experience. And so, my when I was leaving Penn and Wharton, I realized this is a great foundation. They teach you a lot. I just wish that there was something that bridged the gap between sort of where a lot of students want to be now after they graduate college and sort of what my experience was in school.
And that eventually leads to Horizons, right?
That does, and I think Horizons is part of the equation, right? I think for students who want to be in technology, that leads to Horizons. I think there are other aspects of my Penn and Wharton experience that could have improved for folks who want to go into finance, want to go to consulting. To be honest, despite the amazing sort of finance curriculum that Wharton has, a lot of the things I learned, I also learned on the side in that realm.
So you did so much in college. Like, what was your average day like?
My average day, crazy, to be honest. So I played varsity sprint football my first 2 years. I tried rowing crew actually for a little bit. I was a varsity athlete in high school, so I really wanted that sort of experience in college as well. But when you're taking 7 classes, trying to juggle starting a company, and you have 3 hours of football practice every single day, 7 days a week, it becomes pretty difficult. So for me, organization is a big thing. I've always been relatively organized, but I kind of forced myself to be insanely organized when I went to college. So I still have all my agendas. I've written agendas for the past 6 years in written format, and I have them still. So I used to be extremely organized. My day, I would normally wake up probably at 6:15. I'd go to the gym. If I didn't have workouts that day, I'd go to the gym in the morning. I'd go do a relatively full day of classes. I would go to football practice from generally kind of 6 p.m. to 9 p.m., come back, do homework for about 3-4 hours, go to bed, and repeat.
And where did the company start?
Yeah, so the company, the first company I worked on when I was in college was Altair Prep. We were essentially building a sort of pattern recognition-based platform and tutoring methodology for the SAT and the ACT, and then eventually the goal was to expand to the GMAT. The idea being that generally a lot of these test prep curricula are very much one-size-fits-all in their approach, and we wanted to sort of be a hyper-personalized platform and tutoring methodology. So this again, completely on accident. I think it was over Thanksgiving break or winter break. I forgot what break it was, but one of my good high school friends, Darwish, and I were just sitting in his basement talking about the SAT. We had tutored both our younger brothers. We had both scored, pretty well on the SAT. So we just talked about the options out there, and there is no sort of, good sort of premium test prep offering, or there wasn't at the time. It was hyper personalized. So we just talked about it. Nothing came of it for probably a couple months after our conversation. Then all of a sudden we said, hey, this thing should exist. And then I started dedicating, 3 hours of what would have been my sleep time to kind of getting Altair Prep off the ground.
Right. So in terms of when you started actually building things, when did that happen? When did you learn to code, and why?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I've actually answered the question quite a few times recently. But Altair Prep, as it started to expand, it led me to take a year off from school. So it was a tough decision. So today, taking time off from school, people think about it a little bit, obviously seriously, but there's a lot more leeway with this now. Even a couple years when I was in school, it was still very much kind of taboo, and people were very weirded out by this idea of taking a year off from school, especially from when you're in Wharton, where there's a very traditional, structured path to success. So Altair Prep started taking off. I had actually signed an offer to work at a private equity firm my sophomore summer. In May, my start date was June 5th or so. The third week of May, I called up the guy who gave me the offer at the private equity firm, and I said, I cannot take this offer. I have to pursue this venture that's taking off. His reaction was probably not the most appropriate of reactions. He was extremely, extremely upset that I had formed them this late. He promised that I wouldn't have a career in finance, and essentially sort of kind of turned me off for a while from finance. But I ended up pursuing Altair Prep that summer, and it did really well during the summer. So we actually, my co-founders and I, we took a semester off from school that eventually became 2 semesters. We realized though that Altair Prep was an interesting product, and although we tried to build a piece of software out of it, we couldn't, partially because software wasn't what was needed to solve that problem, and partially because we didn't know how to code. So we tried to hire a CTO. We gave a lot of equity away to hire a CTO. But since this was still sort of at pre-product stage, idea stage, it was very difficult to get someone else to build out our vision for it, especially someone who didn't completely understand. So the CTO search was very difficult. So we eventually sort of ended up kind of parting ways with our CTO. We then tried hiring a series of freelancers to build out our product. So we spent a bunch of money doing that. Also didn't work out just because there are always things we needed to fix and add, and it was an ongoing process. So eventually, I got extremely frustrated, and we decided to pause Altair Prep, and I decided I was going to learn how to code. So I moved from Philadelphia, where Altair was based, to Los Angeles because there were a handful of angel investors who agreed to basically fund what was initially an idea at the time, but more so fund my learning experience to learn how to code. So I moved to LA with my co-founder at the time, who was Vinny, one of our Altair Prep co-founders, and basically spent that year just coding, teaching myself how to code. I probably went to 25 different hackathons. I spent probably 14 to 16 hours a day in front of a computer learning to code. I started off with Ruby on Rails, eventually sort of did that and a couple other things. But for me, learning to code just came from, not from interest or desire, more so just need, pure need.
How many projects did you end up building when you got back to school?
Oh, man. So I would have to open up my Heroku dashboard. I can actually do that right now, but probably 25, 30 different projects. And these are also not kind of mini projects. These are all, pretty robust projects.
How did you get those ideas and the problems to solve?
Yeah. So a lot of it had to do with just being outside of my daily environment, to be honest, right? When you're within the pen bubble that people so affectionately talk about, you're exposed to sort of the same problems every single day, right? You talk to the same types of people, you have your same routine every day. When you just pack up your bags and move to a different city, LA for me, and you're no longer in school, the people you interact with are, they're usually like 35, 40 years old. The set of problems you see are very different. And so I actually kept a running list, which I still have because I never built all of them. I kept a running list of just random ideas that I'd come up with. And once I learned how to code, I was like, I'm going to start tackling these one at a time. Now, looking back, that wasn't the greatest choice. I think it would have been better to say, I'm going to tackle one and, build it out completely. But for me, instead, I sort of, would build something for 3 months, 4 months, get it off the ground, and then immediately drop it and go switch something else and build that, get it off the ground, and switch. So I was able to build a lot of things, and a couple of them went from idea to actually sort of business. But, I never actually sort of started what I consider a company.
Did any of them ever get you into trouble?
One of them got me into quite a bit of trouble, yes.
What happened?
So it was pre-registration time at Penn, and I decided that I was going to build, I was going to build something that was useful. So I was kind of looking around at what was available on Wharton Spike and on Pen and Touch, and I stumbled into, I guess, what we'd call a vulnerability with the way Spike was built, the platform. And what ended up happening was you could actually sort of manipulate the sort of server request that was being made on the website to essentially sort of plug in any class you want at Penn, and it would display a list of currently registered students, their photos, their names, their email addresses, everything. So I decided to, exploit is the right word, exploit this vulnerability, and I built a platform called Penn Class List or something like that. So essentially built this platform that that allows you to input any class name at Penn, and it would show you a list of everyone enrolled in that class, their names, their images, everything. So I had this up for about 48 hours. We had probably, I think, 2,000 or 3,000 people on it within the first 24 hours. And then I got contacted by Penn administration, the head of IT, and a handful of other people who basically sent me a cease and desist letter and then cut off access to all of my Penn accounts. So what ended up happening was, I had to actually bring a lawyer in for this. because it was a huge sort of privacy violation, and they were afraid of stalking issues, among other things. So that was pretty messy, but it was short lasted.
Were you doing all of this stuff alone?
So I was doing a lot of it alone, but I had sort of my hacker community, I guess. Edward Lando was a really good friend and also co-founder of Horizons, was someone that I worked with for a lot of these. I worked with one of my friends, Vinny. I worked with an older friend of mine, Jose, for a lot of them. But most of the time I spent by myself doing it. I just had friends who would come and kind of give input.
How did you meet that community at Penn?
Yeah. So at the time, this is probably still the case. At the time, I think people who were really interested in technology, that community was pretty small and relatively closely knit. So, for me, there were a handful of them in the Huntsman program who were interested in this. And so all those people that I mentioned happen to also be in Huntsman. So I met them through that program. And then there are others who, when you build something that people hear about and they're interested in it, they reach out. So when people hear about some of these projects, they'll reach out and eventually sort of, you'll connect with them, continue working with them. But there was no sort of organized form or organization to sort of meet these people. For me, it was a little bit organic, I think.
Right. So you did this a lot outside of your traditional college education. So what is the current role of the four-year college then, do you think?
Yeah. So I think what we see as the four-year structure, I think, is going to change. So first of all, I think the sort of time frame kind of over which you are in what we consider college, that's going to change over the next 5 years, maybe even sooner. So I see college as doing just two things, right? One, providing a kind of platform and providing an ecosystem for you to explore. And two, through that, preparing you at some point in time for the real world, right? It does those two things. I think, some universities tend to do one or the other. I think very few colleges do both, right? You have your sort of your Whartons of the world that get you extremely good, extremely well prepared for the real world if you're tackling finance or consulting. But when it comes to exploration, I think it's pretty limited. And then you have schools that are, much more so on the exploration side, but then when it comes to preparation for the real world, they're lacking. I think a real college experience should allow you to do both. And I think that's sort of where things are headed. I think the 4-year structure is one of the reasons why a lot of university programs can't do both. Because for some people, the exploration is only 6 months, right? You start, you realize that you love technology. You don't need to explore anymore. You can actually now go in there and move from exploration to exploitation and start sort of tackling all these different problems, building products, and getting ready for the real world. For other people, it takes 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years to explore, right? They want to go and do more classes, get graduate degrees, all that kind of stuff. So I think the first thing that we'll see over the next few years is the structure of higher education changing, the timeline changing, and it's going to become much more fluid of a structure. And it's going to be kind of more so to each his own type of thing.
And where does Horizons play in that world?
Yeah. So, right now I think what we do is exactly that for technology. We provide a platform for people to, for students who are ambitious, who are interested in technology, we provide a platform for them to explore tech. And we also, at the same time, prepare them for the real world, right? So you go through our program, you learn how to build a lot of different things, you learn how to code, but you also sort of explore technology in general. You might be interested in AI or natural language processing. You might be interested in certain social apps that are mobile. But you sort of explore all these themes and try to figure out kind of what you're interested in. So right now, we're laser focused on a small part of technology, I think, like getting you a very strong foundation in software engineering and learning how to code and exploring here. Long-term vision is to expand this, right? Technology, traditional software is part one. We're always going to be pretty close to tech and technology, but there's a lot of other things we can expand into. The big picture is we want to be an education platform that allows bright, ambitious students to explore and to also sort of get ready for the real world, whether that's the world of technology or the real world of finance or the real world of oil and gas. That's TBD, but that's kind of the goal.
Right. So you are obsessed with technology and you love it. So after college, I'm sure that's what you did, right? Another company or another startup?
Nice. That is the opposite of what I did. I went and worked at a very large financial institution, at a private equity firm called Apollo.
Why?
Yeah. So for me, I came from my background was a little bit interesting, right? There are a lot of people for whom it's one or the other. They find technology in college, or they find something in college, they love it, and they're able to sort of put everything else away and focus on that completely. For me, I learned how to code. I started building a lot of things. I was super interested in technology, but I also happened to be really, really interested in finance. And part of me sort of regretted not being able to explore that world a little bit more, despite having gone to kind of such a premier, university that prides itself in training people to be the best in finance and business. And I felt like I hadn't gotten. I feel like I hadn't sort of exploited that as effectively as I could have. So I'd done a finance internship during my college career in banking at Moelis & Company. So I leveraged that after I graduated and told myself, I'm going to spend a little bit of time in finance. I'm going to sort of learn investing from a kind of professional point of view. I'm going to spend some time in the industry. But I promised myself that I would only spend time there if I was learning, if I was really learning, no matter what, right? Whether that was 1 month or 3 years, whatever, TBD, but I said I was only going to be there if I was learning. So I went to Apollo, an amazing community, great firm. I worked on their sort of middle market technology investing platform. Surprise, surprise. So, got to see a lot of different middle market tech companies, how they were run, got to see sort of how valuation works in the middle market, pre-IPO, private and public companies, just got a very, very good understanding of kind of later stage tech. And then after 8 months, I realized I wasn't learning anymore. I also realized that I had a lot of knowledge now, and I had developed a product thinking skill set when I was in school, and then I had now sort of developed a business thinking skill set as well, and so I decided to leave.
And did you automatically start working on Horizons?
Yeah, so Horizons actually started while I was, towards the tail end of my Apollo career. So, I actually sort of have a lot to thank, I guess, to go to Penn, Wharton, and finance in general, because, being in that world, I saw a large number of very talented, young graduates who left. They spent a year in banking or a year at McKinsey or BCG or somewhere else, and they wanted to sort of move into tech, right? Partly due to the fact that tech, as we know it, is more broadly defined, and partly due to the fact that the opportunity set has increased now, and you can have a very viable career as an engineer or as product manager or starting your own company. So I saw a lot of our Wharton peers who had graduated trying to go into tech, but they couldn't, right? They felt like a lot of the doors were closed off, and it had to do with their knowledge of technology. They didn't know how to code, or they just didn't fundamentally understand tech. They didn't have a product thinking skill set. They were trained in this business thinking. They had this business mindset, but not the product side of things. So a lot of them felt like the doors were closed off, and they felt stuck. And so I actually had spoken to Darwish, my co-founder from the Altair days, about this. He actually had taken a sort of coding bootcamp program and was working as a product manager. And he told me about how much he had learned in such a short period of time, how he was able to sort of shift his career trajectory by sort of learning to code and those things. So the idea came together pretty quickly for us, because I was someone who experienced that problem. Darwish was someone who experienced that problem. We saw a lot of folks around us who were experiencing that problem every day. So we kind of came up with the sort of wireframe almost for Horizons, the straw man, and started building it out for kind of a couple weeks, and I very quickly left Apollo after.
Right. So, in terms of in a generalization, how do you know when to quit something you obviously love, like finance, and then go for something else you love, like technology? Like, when is the right time?
Yeah, you'll quit before you know, or you have to, is the rule. I think I spend a lot of time thinking about this, right? And I sort of pegged quitting my job to a lot of different metrics, right? I said, we should get interest from this many students, or we should raise money, or we should have hired XYZ people, or it should be 70 degrees Fahrenheit for 3 days in a row in New York. I had a bunch of random metrics that I would sort of peg this to, and at some point I realized that it was very much a chicken and egg problem, right? You can't reach those lofty sort of metrics that you set for yourself until you commit a little bit more time to it. And it varies from career to career. For me, I worked at a pretty prestigious, very rigorous kind of financial institution. So generally, my hours, I was up at 7 a.m. I was at the office at 8:15, and I'd leave at like 10:30, 11 p.m. On a good day. So for me to commit time outside of work to a venture would mean midnight to 2 a.m. or midnight to 3 a.m. So there's only so much you can get done there. So eventually I realized the chicken and egg problem was a terrible problem, and I told myself, I just gave myself a deadline. I said, on this day I'm going to quit, put it in my calendar, on that day I quit.
Right, so now you're still all 20-something. How's the work-life balance now?
Yeah, sort of the myth of entrepreneurship, or the biggest myth of entrepreneurship, is that you set your own hours, and so there's work-life balance that you can control. The truth, which very few people will tell you, the truth is that if anything, your work-life balance, no matter what job you actually worked before, your work-life balance probably only gets worse. But I think that's due to the fact that work and life just become the same thing for you, right? When you work a job, like a traditional corporate job, there is a distinction between work and life, so people can actually think about this concept of work-life balance. When you start a company, your life is that company, right? There's this concept like sweat equity and all these sorts of things. All that means is that your day-to-day life is actually that company. So for us right now, we're what, less than a year in still technically, but maybe about a year in. So there's really no work-life balance, but that's because work and life are the same thing. We're kind of happy about it, actually. I think that's one of the things you realize. Like, people who choose this path and do well in this path are the ones who actually believe that work and life are kind of the same thing, and they're happy with it, with not having that balance.
Does it help that you're working with some of your best friends?
Oh yeah, that helps a lot, right? I think if you work with people that you hate, you're definitely going to kind of hate your job and hate your career. For me, it's working with people that I like and my friends, but it's also working with people who are like-minded, right? Darwish and I, Darwish is probably one of the few people, Darwish and Lando, two of the only people who, on Saturday, Sunday nights regularly we'll be in the office together just talking about ideas and how we can grow the company and, marketing tactics and how we can make the product better, right? For us, you have to find people with that same mindset of work and life are the same thing. And I want to dedicate the next 10, 15 years to this, and I'm going to enjoy it.
Right.
But yeah, liking them definitely makes it easier.
So, for students in college, what is your advice for them?
Yeah, advice for students in college, huh? I think the biggest piece of advice I can give, because I'm not too far out from school, right? I'm still relatively young. I'm not an old dude, I think. But the biggest piece of advice I can give is not to wait. I think there's sort of this archetype that we have in our minds that whether it's like books or movies or shows or our friends we've have put in our minds, we have this archetype of a successful person, and generally it's someone who's like 33, 34 years old who has spent time in an industry, who realizes that there are all these problems, decides to go tackle one, and goes and sort of builds a company. Or it's someone who, climbs up the corporate ladder for 15, 20 years, becomes hyper successful, and goes and buys a house in the Hamptons. And there's a sort of like this archetype of success. I would say the biggest flaw with this is that it kind of solidifies this concept, this notion that you have to wait to be successful. That you have to wait to go out there and go try something. I think the biggest thing people don't realize when they're in school is that it is truly you have a sandbox that you're playing in, and it's a risk-free time, completely risk-free. It's the only 4 years that you have in your life, I would argue, that truly represent no risk. Right? You can do whatever you want. You can fail miserably. You can get in all kinds of trouble. hopefully not like too bad, but you can get all kinds of trouble and people forgive you. You can say stupid things when you interview people and people forgive you, right? It's because you're a college student. You'll never have that time ever again. And so I would encourage everyone to take advantage of it, right? If you have a company or an idea you want to start, go do it now. Don't wait. If you want to go take in the fall or the spring, take time off and go do it. Because you never sort of get this time back after college. It's kind of like the clock starts ticking for real.
So with that in mind, would you have done anything different in your college experience?
Yeah. So, I took a year off from school. But a lot of the things that I was working on in my year off, they felt ephemeral because I knew I had to come back to school, right? I think there's an incredible amount of value at universities in being in college, but I think when you sort of have this mindset that where you tell yourself you have to operate within the confines of a 4-year university sort of college education, you lose creativity. The creativity dies. For me, I stopped working on what would have been, I think, a very successful company and idea because I felt like I was limited to having a year to build something out. And so I felt like I had to move faster and because I had to go back to school. So if I was back in college, I probably would have stayed out for a little bit longer. And I'm not saying I would have dropped out of school, but I just mean if things were going well, I wouldn't have sort of just decided to come back just to come back. I probably would have pursued whatever project I was working on, be it Altair Prep or Store Talk or Trend Bent. I would have pursued them further and seen them through before kind of coming back to school.
Right. So Store Talk, Trend Bent, what were those?
Oh yeah, I just threw out these random names at you, huh? Store Talk was Trend Bent was actually the first post Altair project that became a sort of an idea, like a company, and it was actually the first one where I was actually technically kind of a CTO figure. So I built the entire product. We essentially what we were building was a personalized style engine for men. The idea being that guys hate shopping, but they want to sort of have trendy clothes and look good, but they're not going to spend 3 hours online shopping. They're certainly not going to go to stores in person and shop. So we essentially built an online platform that consisted of a series of smart quizzes to figure out sort of what type of clothing you like, what type of environment you're in, your sizing, etc. And based on that, we would ship you a box of clothing every month for free. You'd buy what you'd like and you'd return the rest. Probably sounds familiar to like some companies you now are doing pretty well.
So how did you decide that was a problem you want to solve? Like, there's so many things people want to work on, so many ideas. How do you sit down and say, I'm going to work on this for this long? And I guess you can start with, how long did it take you to build Trend Bent?
Yeah. So I think the answer to that first question, so it took me probably 2 months to get up a good working prototype of Trend Bent. Probably should have been faster, but it was my first real project. The way we decided to actually pursue it, I was working with my friend Vinny, was we actually didn't put very much thought into it, to be honest. I told myself we realized this was a problem that existed. We realized, it probably had its business merits. We thought we were reasonably smart Penn, Wharton students. Unit economics sounded like they would work, so we're just like, let's build it. And so we built it out. And the biggest thing about deciding whether to pursue something or not is to probably limit how much time you spend thinking about it. The people who are going to be listening to this podcast, for example, I would be willing to bet they're overall pretty smart people, pretty smart young people. Any idea that you have can probably work, right? Whether it's a $100 million idea or $1 billion idea or a $50 million idea, that's irrelevant, and we don't have to think about that now. But it'll probably work. It's just a matter of executing and sort of putting your mind to it. So I think I actually encourage a little bit of naivety in picking ideas. Spend a little bit of time thinking about it, make sure it's not sort of something crazy, and just go tackle it and build it and get it off the ground.
And then when do you know how to quit? Or when to quit?
Yeah. It's a good question. I would say you probably don't quit.
Well, why did you quit building Trendbent or Store Talk or?
Yeah, I think this goes back to sort of our, my issue of I felt sort of confined by the time frame that I was operating in, right? I felt like I had to succeed in a year, basically, right? That's the short answer. I was like, I have to get enough, I have to make enough money, or I have to raise enough, or I have to get enough users to make this thing big and work in 1 year, which is really stupid, right? Like, very few successful things are built on a 1 year or 2 year time horizon. I guess Instagram maybe, and a couple others, but besides that, very few things are. And the real answer is I probably shouldn't have quit either of those, because on the Store Talk side, there's 3 companies that are doing extremely well that did that same exact thing after we did. And then on the Trendbent side, there's a bunch, right? You've probably heard of, I don't know, Stitch Fix, Trunk Club, Frank and Oak. Everlane now has that. There's a bunch of companies doing this, and they're doing great. So for our examples, the real answer is we should not have quit working on it. I think in practice, if you've really put a lot of time into it and you're getting very strong negative customer feedback, the biggest thing about products is that it's not that the product is failing necessarily. It's about sort of your product market fit, right? It's that you're tackling the wrong market, or the market doesn't exist, or you're tackling them in the wrong way. And so when you realize that, then it's time to sort of, I wouldn't even call it quit. I think you pivot generally. But you realize you pivot when you realize your customers don't really want what you're building.
Right. And in terms of just going back to college, all your friends are doing OCR, they're doing on-campus recruiting, they are looking for those jobs that, that they've always wanted in banking and consulting and things like that. How do you filter out noise like that? How do you decide to take a year off when it's so taboo?
Yeah, it's extremely difficult. So especially at a school like Penn, especially if you go to Wharton, you're right. There's an incredible amount of pressure to take part in the kind of prevailing ecosystem, which there is kind of the banking consulting ecosystem. I think what you have to have, no one can kind of do it by yourself. If you're the only guy or girl working on something and every other person around you is working on something else, it takes an incredible amount of mental strength to go keep doing that. You have to have a community, right? You have to have other people around you who support what you're doing and who feel the same way and who
Re-record. Okay. Can we take it from the question, how do you filter out the noise in a very traditional competitive environment, especially at a place like the Wharton School? Why did you decide to take a year off, and how did you do that?
Yeah. I think filtering out the noise is probably one of the hardest things to do. It's extremely difficult, and it is even more difficult when you're one of the only people doing what you're doing, right? I think the biggest thing about being a student at Penn and Wharton is that it provides an amazing business foundation education, but you feel pressured to go into the banking consulting, the prevailing ecosystem, the banking consulting ecosystem, very strongly because, what 80% of people do or 85% of people do. So if you're the only one, if every other person is doing other things and you're the only person, guy or girl, building a product and trying to go into tech, it's very hard. You have to have a lot of mental strength. For me, I think what made it possible, and I think what I would advise is find a community of like-minded people, right? I had my co-founders for all these projects. They left school with me, right? They were very supportive. They did it themselves. I had some older friends of mine who are almost mentors in the Huntsman program who supported it, and they said, you have to go pursue this. You should go do it. I had a very supportive community and ecosystem, which gave me the mental strength to do it. So you have to find those people. So you got to find other people on campus who feel the same way.
Right, and that comes from, like you said, building things?
It comes from building things. It comes from, it really comes from putting yourself in the right kind of environment, right? If you're kind of you're a Wharton student studying, doing a finance concentration, and you're in all finance classes or some of the Wharton core classes, it's very tough for you to go meet those people who are going to be doing other things in tech. So, you have to go to Wise Tech House events. You have to go, maybe take like a CS minor class, or go to some talks, or go to Penn Apps, go to a hackathon. You have to sort of go and explore these other parts of the Penn ecosystem that has people with those mindsets.
Cool. So we have some stock questions for you that we want to ask every speaker and just see what they have to say. What is your formative moment as an entrepreneur? Where can we trace your roots back to?
Formative moments. It's a good question. I would say getting, the initial couple months of Altair prep. Those are probably the most formative moments, right? That was my foray into entrepreneurship, into technology. That was my foray into anything that has to do with product thinking, starting a business. And really what it came down to was, I was juggling a lot of different things while I was in school. I was, playing sports. I was involved. I was taking 7 classes at the time, and I tried to start a company as well. And it really gave me perspective on what it actually takes to be an entrepreneur, what it actually takes to build a product and hustle it and get it off the ground. And so, there were 2 months there that I think it was probably kind of February, March of my sophomore year at Penn. Those are probably the most formative moments. And even today, the way, my mindset, the way I kind of approach problems, the way I think about opportunities, very much so informed by those couple months, the experiences there.
In terms of the community that really supported you into your entrepreneurial forays, who would you want to thank now, and for what?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, there's a handful of folks who are, who I currently work with, who are amazing, and who I worked with, who I've been working with for the past couple of years. So, Darwish and Edward, my 2 co-founders, 2 of the kind of hardest working, most sharp sort of business and product minded people that, I've had the pleasure of knowing. Those guys I can't thank enough. Edward had a lot to do with me sort of committing to leave Apollo. He helped a lot with that. Darwish is someone that I've known for, almost a decade now. So, he's one of my closest friends. When I was actually leaving school, there were a couple of upperclassmen who are a little bit older than me now, who are almost like older brother figures to me. Jose Varela is one of them. He is, he was a Huntsman program graduate. Actually, one of the reasons that I started to learn how to code was as a result of his encouragement. Joe Percoco is another one. He's a brilliant guy who worked at every brand name firm you can think of, McKinsey, Goldman Sachs, all these places, and was really sort of very encouraging in me sort of going and exploring all these other things, and kind of used his experiences at some of these large firms to tell me that I shouldn't go do that. So yeah, those are just some of the people I'd like to thank.
Is there anything you'd like to say to close this up?
I think we've covered a lot. I think cool. I just want to the one thing I'll reiterate to any sort of current students who are listening, which I think will be a big part of the audience, is this is your time to experiment. You really don't have any other free time like this in your life to do so. So real experiment. It doesn't have to be starting a company or starting an idea, but there's a lot of different ways you can experiment. Just make sure you do as much as you can and explore while you're still here in school.